Hi, so this is a STEAM lesson and it is inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. And this is a famous architect who designed buildings inspired by nature. This lesson is adapted from an activity provided by the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation, and the link is in um, this STEM lesson as well as in the description of the video. So it's intended for sixth grade and addresses standards. The math standard it relates to is ratios, and um, there's a design element, and then for science, students are talking about human impact on the earth. And then some art is designing uh, and using or designing things that are relevant to community needs. And then students also will be writing arguments in this lesson. So writing standards. It takes about 3 45-minute class periods, but it's flexible for those presentations at the end. And it's just really focusing on how design impacts and considers the needs of a community as well as the impacts on the earth. The essential questions are what should be considered when developing and designing a community, and how do our choices impact the earth? So the challenge is that they've been asked by the Council for City Planning to design and develop a building to address a need or a want of the community. The design must be to scale. So this is where ratios come in. They're designing a building that would be realistic size if it were to be built with or to scale. And then it has to consider community needs. So this might mean, does the community need children's hospitals or schools, libraries, things like that? And then also considering like the size of the community, which these things can be addressed within their arguments. There's not a set size of community, but maybe you want to actually make it more relevant and use your population and your needs within your actual community. And then they also will be researching the impact that their building might have on the environment, or different ways that they can make their building more efficient for the environment. And then they'll present their designs to the council with reasoning for why their design should be chosen. Possible materials include this design page from the Frank Lloyd Wright activity page that's linked in, and crayons, colored pencils, markers. You might pre-select some research materials for them just to make sure they're school appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and from reliable resources. And that could be another conversation that you have with them. And then I've also included pictures of Frank Lloyd Wright designs just so they kind of get an idea of his designs and might inspire some students. So overall, this, is, or for the teacher, it's mainly like just kind of monitoring and facilitating this and facilitating brainstorms and just getting students thinking about their designs and how it might have an impact. And students will be, whenever they're doing this, they'll be in groups. It might be groups of 2 or 3 to complete the challenge, and they have to agree on a scale and then design it to the scale. So for example, I did a drawing on mine, if you can see right here. My scale is for every 1 box, it represents 100 feet. So my building is about 1,100 feet tall. So obviously it's in a bigger city and it's a children's hospital. So I, did some considerations and for the community. And then students will be evaluated during their presentations, no longer than 10 minutes, just to give, for that management of time to argue their designs. So they'll design using a scale, and they must include that legend in or the ratio to help explain and to check for understanding of ratios. And then they'll explain their building and why they chose what the building should be, how it supports the community needs, and considerations of its impact on the earth. They also must use at least 3 reliable sources. So this can kind of tie in some disciplinary literacy standards. And then to change it for younger grades, just discuss how you would design a drawing to represent the size of real buildings. If it were bigger, what would that mean? Smaller, what does it mean? All those kinds of things, not necessarily actual ratios. For upper grades, maybe challenge them to use DesignCAD if you are comfortable with that and have experience with that. And then considering the students, extensions would be to include designing using 2 different scale ratios. Maybe don't provide pre-selected resources and have them practicing how to find acceptable resources and reliable resources. Have students actually build a 3D model using that ratio and for the scaling. And then considerations of different backgrounds. So students share can share the common architecture of the places that they're from. I think buildings play a really big role in culture, and this would let students have more of maybe a personal interest and connection. So here's some examples of the Frank Lloyd Wright architecture. But yeah, so that's the STEM lesson number 3, and all about ratios, art, and human impact.